I will now call the regular meeting of the Transgender Equity Council to order. And I will call the roll. Give me 1 second to take this slide back down so that I can see roll call. And Kenzie Weller.
Hi.
Diana Anderson.
Here.
May Brooks.
Here.
Billy Couric.
Here.
Nissa Mitchell.
Present.
Olivia St. John.
Here.
Amira Khan.
Present.
Taryn Wood.
Here.
Wonderful. There are 8 members present. There are 3 absent, and there are as well a couple guests joining. So we do have quorum, and I will pass it over to Kenzie, our chair, to take care of adopting the agenda.
All right, who's got it? Come on, who's gonna adopt the agenda? Someone's gotta.
This is Billy. I motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And this is track. I'm going to call roll again to vote on that. Kenzie?
Here.
Yes.
You're going for yes, Kenzie. Diana?
Yes.
May?
Yes.
Billy?
Yes.
Nissa?
Yes.
Olivia?
Yes.
Amira?
Yes.
And Taryn?
Yes.
There are 8 in favor, 3 absent, none opposed. The motion passes and the agenda is adopted. And I believe the first few agenda items are updates I have to provide. So apologies if there's a decent amount of me talking at you all today, but I promise we'll move into a lot of discussion in the second half of this conversation when we start to think through strategic planning for 2022. But we're going to start. I'm going to give an update on just the timeline of what online meetings are going to look like for us for the foreseeable future, and then some updates on meetings with new and returning council members, on progress on the fall 2021 recommendations, including I've been following the conversations in City Council over the past week around banning no-knock warrants and other responses to Amir Locke's murder. And I will share updates on that as well. I wanted to kind of add that both as it related to your recommendations and in general, and brief you all on what was going on internally within the city on that. And then we'll share some updates on other ongoing projects. And please jump in. I will pause for questions at points in this because it is a lot of me offering updates, and I will also send out minutes afterwards. And if you click on the agenda that's in the calendar invite or on the agenda posted in LIMS, the documents I'm referencing are in there if that's useful for you to follow along. But please interrupt me with questions throughout too, because I know this is a decent amount of me talking. But the most logistical first, I just know that I haven't gotten back to you all for a while with a timeline on, is there a point at which we need to be back in person? And wanted to just give you the update that there probably is a point. We at the city have not determined, the people at the city in charge of making that determination have not determined what it is yet. City staff are starting to be sent back to work next week who were working from home. But we are not going to move any of our public online meetings back to in person yet. And when we do that, we're first going to move city council meetings and figure out everything we need for that before we get anywhere near moving appointed board meetings. The city has, for now, indefinitely extended the state of emergency so that we are legally allowed to continue meeting online. So I don't anticipate being back in person as the TEC at any time within the next few months, based on the fact that they're trying to phase this. At the point when we are required to be back in person, it will be because they took down the state of emergency, and we will be by state law legally required to be in person. And as much advance warning as I get on that, I will pass on to you as well, and work with you all on COVID boundaries around that in all the ways that are within my power. But just wanted to give you that update, since I know I haven't had clarity on that for a while, and therefore haven't offered you all any clarity on that for a while. Does anyone have any logistical questions on that before I move on to like project and policy type updates?
I'm just curious. Sorry, this is Galen Nissa. I screw up my own name these days. Isn't that fun? Anyway, I was wondering if we end up having to go back in person, are we going to have another conversation about when the meetings are scheduled to ensure that like folks are still able to attend? Because obviously it's a different logistical situation to be able to attend from home than to go to a particular physical location.
This is track. That's a great question. We can totally have that conversation once we have a timeline. Technically, you all legally had to adopt your calendar of meetings for 2022, but we will just vote to amend that calendar of meetings if people need to change timing in order to make it accessible in person. Thanks for raising that. Does anyone have any other meeting logistic questions? There's one person on the phone who I'm gonna mute just because we're getting a lot of background noise from you, who just joined recently, but if you have something to contribute later, please feel free to press *6 to unmute yourself. Okay. I will move on then. I'm gonna give some updates on meetings with new and returning council members. I have been trying to brief a bunch of the new council members on all of your recommendations from 2021 over the course of the past month since they've been inaugurated, so that they know what is the community engagement and community feedback they're already stepping into, and so that you all know what they're planning on working on for the year, so you have a sense of what policies you might have space to comment on this year. And we'll talk more about like what we anticipate happening in the capital C city, in the city government, when we get into strategic planning, but some brief pieces around new council members. So I have not connected with all of them yet, but of the ones I have connected, I wanted to just raise a couple priorities that people are excited about that overlap with what you all are working on. The new council member for Ward 1, Councilmember Payne, Payne, is some of his big priorities are going to be community safety and public health, which overlaps with a lot of your work. He's really interested in work around safe use sites or supervised injection sites and looking into legal options for that. And he is really interested in auditing city processes that aren't serving us how we need to, including things like how we're assessing whether our work is racially equitable, auditing that process and kind of analyzing that from a data perspective, which I think could prove valuable to you all as we figure out what you'll be focusing on. And this will be in the minutes too. I apologize. I probably should have like written this up on a PowerPoint slide for a visual, and I did not manage to do that. So I know this is just me talking at you. Ward 2 is new council member Wansley Worlaba, Wonsley space Worlobah. Sorry, I'm not good at spelling things out loud. Kenzie has watched me do it a lot and is laughing at me, I think. One of her highest priorities is going to be housing, which is looking like rent control, and also getting the city to publish a standardized response to encampments, so that we actually have a policy we're following, as opposed to kind of how things have been happening right now. And then she is on the public health and safety and public works and infrastructure council committees and is interested in figuring out how to leverage those roles and being in those conversations. Ward 9, Councilmember Chavez, Chavez, is really committed to the East Phillips Urban Farm Project, to addressing concerns around disability justice in the minimum wage ordinance and carve-outs that currently exist for not having to pay disabled workers in certain contexts the minimum wage that is otherwise applicable. The opioid response, so also really interested in safe use sites, community safety, housing, and is vice chairing council's race equity subcommittee. So we'll be really invested in all of the conversations around racial equity that are happening. Ward 10, new council member Chugtai, Chughtai, also has a ton of priorities around housing. She's also really interested in, as you all stated in your recommendations, expanding the pilot guaranteed basic income program that's going on right now in issues around reproductive justice, in looking into getting a city municipal ID, which could serve multiple fronts, could ideally be both a way for people who are undocumented to have some form of documentation, and also, depending on how it works out, possibly could be an easier route for folks accessing changed names or gender markers on some IDs without going through the barriers that other IDs involve. That is a question mark, but is theoretically a thing municipal IDs can do. So putting that in there with all the caveats. Also really interested in safe use sites. And then lastly, I met with staffers for Ward 11, new council member Koski, Koski. I didn't hear about her priorities as much as just the things that you all are talking about that she is supportive of, but she is supportive of the mental health crisis response teams that go out instead of MPD to mental health crisis calls, and also of the funding that you all, that the trans equity work is possibly asking for out of the American Rescue Plan Act around training for property owners. I'm going to pause there. I threw a lot at you. That will also be in the notes. But I wanted to kind of flag that and also put out a call for if there are people who live in any of those wards and want to be further involved in conversations with their council members, or live in other wards and want to be involved in conversations with their council members, let me know as well. Does anyone have any questions on any of that? If not, I'm going to go into talking a little bit about the fall 2021 recommendations. I am going to open the wrong document first. So attached to the agenda is a full PDF of all of your recommendations with kind of listed under each bullet point what progress we've made on that. I am not going to screen share it because it's way more words than is actually the level of detail we want to go into here, but it is available for reference if anyone wants. But I will pull out kind of the highlights of where there are progress on things. So under housing, for tenant opportunity, sorry, I'm distracted by this dog and it's bringing me a lot of joy. You don't need, truly bringing me joy. You don't need to apologize. For tenant opportunity to purchase, the city council was in the process of trying to pass a tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance last year. That did not happen before the council transition. Councilmember Ellison, Ellison, and Chughtai, Chughtai, are co-authoring that ordinance now and working on the process of moving it forward again. Of any policy that you all have advocated on in the past, that's probably the thing that's going to come before a council vote soonest. I think there is going to be a push to make some changes to it, so that there's currently an exemption for property owners who own 5 or fewer properties. They don't have to give their tenants like the first right to buy the property when they're selling it. And I think there's going to be a push to move that exemption even lower, because right now most north side rental properties don't actually qualify for the ordinance with that exemption. I think of anything you all have spoken out about this, both the opportunity to try to change the ordinance and the opportunity to try to get enough votes to get it passed in council is probably going to be the thing that comes forward the soonest. As there are community engagement opportunities around it, I will send them your way. But that is in progress and probably up soonest. And then I don't have any other active updates on housing. As I mentioned, the piece around funding for anti-discrimination training for property owners is in progress, and there has been some miscommunication within the department about, do we need the funding? Could it be done anyway without the funding? What exactly does the project look like? So I think that needs to get figured out before we can even make a clear ask of the mayor's office around funding right now. Because what we learned from the budget process is if you make an ask in the budget and that department leadership, it has not actually felt clear amongst themselves that they need that funding, you're not going to get that money in the budget because the department needs to say they need it for it to happen. So I am working on figuring out those clarifications with regulatory services first. The American Rescue Plan Act Phase 2 budget, the mayor is theoretically presenting his proposed budget in March, and then there will be time for the council to comment on it and make amendments, and for the public to comment. And depending on in what form we get this in that budget, that would be a space for you all to advocate around that. I have no more clear timeline than March. When I have more clear timeline, I will let you all know. Around community safety work, so a couple updates. One is that in the 2022 budget, there was $250,000 given to the Office of Performance and Innovation to continue exploring alternative police responses, or alternatives to police response, excuse me. There was also a presentation, and I've linked this in the document that has all of this in detail, but there was also a presentation early last week to the Public Health and Safety Council Committee on the results of the MPD staffing study, which concluded that MPD would benefit from exploring more alternative responses to policing and hiring more like non-sworn officers to do administrative tasks in the police department, that they do not actually need to staff the department with more police officers in order to accomplish the things they are responsible for. I'm also kind of under the realm of community safety going to speak a little bit, and this is a separate attachment that's linked in the agenda, but to what's going on around conversations around no-knock warrant bans. What I linked in the agenda, I keep opening the wrong document, is just literally my notes from watching a couple council committee meetings this week. So they don't look more polished because they're just, I mean, not verbatim, but trying to capture in detail what was going on. But the high-level summary is, as of last Friday, in response to Amir Locke's murder, the mayor issued a moratorium on no-knock warrants, which means that MPD cannot request and cannot carry out no-knock warrants. The moratorium will go on until a new policy on no-knock warrants is written. They have not given a timeline for that, but have promised the moratorium. Well, the mayor has promised the moratorium will go on until that. There is a lot of detail in this that I'm not going to go into all of, but basically things that have happened in city council in the past week. Councilmember Ellison brought in legal experts to present to the council and mayor on no-knock warrants and on advised potential policies. The advised potential policy being ban them in every way possible. And then there was time for council to ask the mayor questions about the current moratorium, about proposed policy changes, and about the somewhat but not fully ban policy that got passed in November of 2020, that was often referred to as a ban on no-knock warrants, but was not one. And to ask questions both on like, okay, how did this get referred to and perceived as a ban on no-knock warrants if it wasn't one? And also, what does this mean? Where does this mean we're going now? And then, so city council cannot ban no-knock warrants because city council has no jurisdiction over MPD. This falls squarely within the mayor's office. The mayor has brought in two national consultants, Dr. Pete Kraska, Kraska, and DeRay McKesson, DeRay McKesson, both of whom, amongst other things, were involved with writing Rihanna's Law in Louisville. They will be involved in consulting on this policy. There were a lot of questions by council members about how much council can be involved in consulting on this policy. There aren't super clear, concrete answers on that. And then scrolling through my notes to highlight the other big pieces. There are a lot of good specific questions that council members asked the mayor that I'm not going to go through all of, but if you want to see more detail of that is in the attached document. And then the other thing that's in that attached document is there was a press conference yesterday where the mayor, the civil rights interim director, and two people from Campaign Zero, DeRay McKesson, and then one other staff, talked kind of to the public about some of the same things. There is a moratorium right now. There will, MPD cannot request or carry out no-knock warrants during the moratorium. This does not prevent other jurisdictions, like Hennepin County, carrying out a no-knock warrant that does not involve MPD, but is in Minneapolis borders. But the moratorium controls everything MPD does. The Civil Rights Department will be involved in drafting this new policy and will also be involved in reviewing what's called the city's communication process around quote-unquote critical incidents, which I would read that statement as a response to the fact that the city originally called Amir Locke a suspect, and other kind of ways that the city has communicated over the past week and a half. And I think the other thing that was said in that press conference that is worth highlighting is that no matter what policy changes happen, and to my understanding, this includes a complete ban, there will probably be a loophole for extreme circumstances, because there are circumstances like a quote unquote active pursuit or something, I do not know the technical language, that don't technically require a warrant. And so a ban on no-knock warrants would not change that based on my understanding of what was said in this. And I want to be very transparent that I experience it as my responsibility in especially a moment like this to follow what's going on internally in the city and report it back to you as accurately as possible. And I am not an expert in any of this. And so I'm capturing things the best I understand them, and definitely don't always know enough to catch when things are poorly or unclearly communicated. And so just want to apologize in advance if I then re-communicate them in those ways. and like name that and hold that, especially as we're in the messiness right now of like a lot of us thought we had a ban on no-knock warrants already. I don't know if we've ever discussed that on the TEC, but I probably thought we did too, and therefore probably called it that on the TEC if we talked about it, because that was a thing that was unclearly communicated in so many places. So I do not have clarity on immediate, like, avenues that the city is actively providing for public engagement. I think both in terms of the crafting of this policy and in terms of Councilmember Payne is bringing forward, is intending to introduce an ordinance to replace MPD with a Department of Public Safety. He is framing it very explicitly as not the exact same conversation that was had on the ballot in November. There are two ways to change the charter. One is the ballot, which is, for those who are following it, question 2 to last November to create a Department of Public Safety that did not pass. The other way is unanimous yes votes from all council members and the mayor. So Councilmember Payne is introducing an intention to approach that avenue of changing the charter. Again, both on this and the no-knock warrants piece, I have not like heard anyone explicitly say yet, like, here is an avenue for public comment or a space where we are explicitly requesting the input of the public, which is not to say that you cannot give it. It is just to say that I don't have like a hearing to put on your calendars. And if there are perspectives that the TEC wants to share, either individually via any of you reaching out to council members or the mayor, or collectively via a letter or something like that, I'm happy to help get whatever information you need to do that. I know I'm technically in the middle of recommendations updates, but that piece was really long, so I want to pause there and give space for people to share reflections or questions. And interpreters, let me know when you're good too, because I know we're switching.
We are still working on it.
Yep, no worries.
And we're all set. Thank you.
Great. And there also do not need to be questions now. I know that was both a lot of information and intense and heavy, but please feel free to reach out one-on-one as well if there is information I can offer or just any conversation you want to have later, or to jump in later on in the meeting if things come up that you want to talk about. And in terms of other recommendation updates, I will share a little bit more. And again, if you want to follow along, this is also in the document that's attached to the agenda. But in terms of expanding the city's definition of supplier diversity, right now, to include LGBTQ-owned, disabled-owned, and veteran-owned businesses, right now what we're hearing from the attorney's office is we would need data from the next metro-wide disparity study in 2024 in order to do it in a way that would legally hold up in the way they recommend. In the meantime, hopefully in partnership with TC Quorum, we can explore other like quote unquote gender neutral, which is, it like means other things and is not the word I'm going to, but not like in the same way that you might say something is a race neutral policy, like other ways to get more vendors doing business with the city that aren't technically targeted, but that we are doing our best to informally target in some way or another until we can target these business owners explicitly in policy. This will both expand opportunities in the meantime, and assuming it doesn't fully close the disparity, will prove the necessity of a, quote, gender-aware policy, like expanding the supplier diversity definition. So I will keep you all updated, but that's where it looks like that conversation is at right now. One piece that has moved, so I don't know how long ago, but I know it was in person, so like really a previous moment of the TEC. Worked with Destiny, who's a current member but can't be here tonight, for parent-teacher conferences on developing what was called a trans equity review of the city as a workplace, something that HR benefits team, HR learning and development team would all have to fill out to look at how the city is treating trans and GNC employees. It was completed by all of those HR staff as part of HR's DEI process, diversity, equity, and inclusion process. And Destiny and I are looking at potential next steps right now, and we'll probably bring those to the TEC soon, maybe even in the next meeting if she's able to make it. But it found some of the key things that came out in this study were around like a need for a way for people to identify themselves both in terms of name and pronouns, and also like there being more gender options in the application process. More ways to change names in city systems and know where gender neutral restrooms are that are like a part of our onboarding and ongoing processes. Having HR policies for how to support transitioning employees, improving healthcare benefits, and improving training for staff. So not all of those are things that will be the first thing targeted, but that was some of what came out of it. It is honestly a big win just to have that data and be able to therefore plan from that, considering we had an almost finalized draft of this review pre-COVID, and hadn't been able to get that data until now. So Destiny and I will report back to you with more on that. And sorry, this is very long, almost done with updates, I swear. In terms of last year in the budget process, you were trying to get Minneapolis Employment and Training to get LGBTQ competency training for like the Career Force and other organizations they fund that do resume development, career development work. We are working with the trainers who are also contracted for the city's gender inclusivity trainings. Shore, SHOR, who's a former TEC member, and ENZI, ENZI. And they are going to provide this training for all of Minneapolis Employment and Training's providers as well. So that's in process and is exciting news. And then last but not least, when Kenzie and Hunta presented the recommendations last fall, the council issued a staff direction looking into, can we require all of the single stall restrooms in city licensed buildings to be gender neutral? I have been staffing the internal work group on that. We'll be reporting back to council next month. The long story very short is legally we can't require it. However, it's not all bad news. For buildings that were built in or after 2020, it is required in state code, and we're going to start enforcing that better. And B, we can incentivize it. And what this work group is going to present to council next month is a very clearly laid out plan of what that incentive process would look like, along with an ask for $30,000, which is small in city budget, even though I still experience it as a lot of money to get on a Teams call and ask for, but $30,000 to cover all of the mailings and handout printing and purchase of bathroom signs so that we can provide free bathroom signs to all the businesses who are just willing to update them themselves And that will be an ask in the American Rescue Plan Act Phase 2 budget, which I have presented to the mayor's office in the hopes that they just propose it in their proposed budget. And if not, it will need to be a council amendment, but feels possible. And if neither of those work, shout out to Sunu, who's been helping me look into other sources of funding as well that could cover that. Billy, I see your hand.
So, sorry, I just want to backtrack. You said that the state will require this in 2022 or 2023?
The state already requires it for every building that was built in or after 2020.
Oh, okay. So it's a new building built after 2020. Okay.
Yep. Or renovation that includes the bathroom area. So builder renovation. Yep. But because it's now in state building code, we have no ability to legislate on it as a city. And so we can't address any of the buildings from before 2020.
Gotcha.
Does anyone have any other questions? I threw a ton of stuff at you there. As there are like asks for public input on things, I will always update you, but that does not mean that you cannot choose to give input on things outside of when there's a public hearing or something like that. So please feel free to still jump on things if there's anything you want to hear more about or engage more with. If not, I am going to lastly give Trans Issues Work Group, that internal city group, updates. And then I'm thankfully going to pass it over to some TEC members to talk about updates on an ongoing project that started out of conversations over the past few months. But in terms of Trans Issues Work Group, the big thing that is happening out of that group right now is trying to attach gender equity guidelines, basically very thorough, comprehensive guidelines for policies, practice, procedure, training around treatment of trans and GNC clients to city contracts with homeless shelters and other social service providers above a certain minimum dollar threshold. We have almost all of the logistics on that worked out. I swear I keep saying that, but it is getting more and more true. We are finalizing some last great questions from procurement. I have met with all the contract managers who would be involved. They are excited to carry this out. And I'm hoping that we're bringing it to council in the next few months to get council approval. It is one of those things, as the city works on implementing this new governance strong mayor structure, that there's not a ton of clarity on whether it needs to go through council or also through the mayor's office, but the mayor's staff who would be responsible for this work is supportive of it, and we have there is yet to be any policy that has this go anywhere other than towards council, so we should be fine regardless of which direction it has to take. There are a number of council members who are really excited about this, and we're working right now on figuring out who would actually author it. Council President Jenkins, also update, Andrea Jenkins is now the council president and now the council vice president, as one both like logistical language update and also exciting piece of news. She's the one we've been working with most closely on this, but we need to present it to the BIZ. It's an acronym BIHS, which is like Business Inspections, Housing and Zoning Council Committee. And she's not on that one, so we need a different resolution author. So working on identifying who that will be. But that is pretty close to in progress. Honestly, the next project after that is going to be trying to get the county to pass something similar. The city does not fund that many shelters. So while this project started out of a focus specifically on trans folks' experiences in shelters, it's not going to impact that many local shelters. It's mostly going to impact other types of social services, which is great, but means that if we want it to reach all the shelters here, the county would need to pass something similar as well. So I am in ongoing conversation with staff at the county about what that would look like. I think us actually passing the thing in the city is going to do a lot to getting the county moving on it, but that is going to be the next push on that, honestly. Does anyone have any questions on that piece? if not, folks who were in the meeting around, can we make weight and size a protected class at the city? Does anyone want to share back some of what happened in that conversation? Diana, I see your hand. Go for it.
Yep, I'll happily share. So we were talking about adding weight and size, weight and height discrimination to the civil rights protections of the city. We have a civil rights ordinance that defines protected classes, and just adding that as a protected class would be was a thing that we were considering. So we talked about several things about the process around it. Right now, the department's pretty understaffed, so it's kind of tough for them to focus on specific things. But they're looking into it. They think it's an interesting idea. We met with Kayla from the department. And one of the questions that we focused on is that in that meeting is what kind of need is there around it? Because a lot of the times with the Civil Rights Office, they recognize a need when cases get brought forward to them. But the thing with fat discrimination is that so few people realize that it is a nexus for discrimination. They don't realize that there's a possibility to build a case out of that. So one of the things when I was researching on it that I found was that in cities that pass these laws, because San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and the state of Michigan actually have weight and height discrimination as protected classes, passing the law acts as an education initiative to a lot of the population, and it makes it possible for people who hadn't realized that what they were experiencing was legally discrimination can now do it. So that's one reason for Minneapolis to move forward on that, to do that. And they are looking at updating the civil rights ordinance as it is. So that would be one way. And one reason that would be a TEC issue is that it intersects a lot with a lot of other protected classes. Fat Black women tend to face a lot more of intersecting discriminations with that. Fat trans men tend to experience a unique sort of discrimination with that. And there's also a poverty issue where being fat makes it harder to get a job, makes it harder to stay employed because of discriminations where hiring managers see you as unprofessional simply because of your weight or your height. Being a little person has its own attendant discrimination issues as well. So it being an intersectional issue that connects with a lot of things with gender and race makes it a good spot for the TEC to pursue.
This is Track. Thank you, Diana. Does anyone have any questions on any of that or additions?
Oh, can I add one more thing? Yeah, this is Diana, by the way. The reason this isn't a disability rights issue is because fat discrimination cases that have been brought under the ADA have only really been applied, had a disability framework applied for the severely obese is the term that they use, the super fat sort of stuff. So people who are more in the middle, who are still fat but not considered super fat under the law, and stuff, don't qualify as a disability. So that was another thing that we discussed in the meeting and found in our research.
Thank you for that. This is Track. And I will also highlight one great point Diana made in the meeting, which is that if this were to get updated as a protected class, like, people would then be able to file cases against, for example, like surgeons who refuse gender-affirming procedures due to weight, which is one of the particular ways that people will see this as a trans-specific quote-unquote issue. even as it is in all of the ways you named also relevant to the TEC. I will keep you all updated as I'll let you switch interpreters.
Thank you. I was just going to say something. And do you have Tafton? Yeah, okay, there we are. Great,
There we
we're
go.
ready.
Sweet. I will keep you all updated as I hear from Kayla on how they're moving forward on updating the civil rights ordinance. I think it's just going to be about this getting tied in with the rest of that timeline and process, and getting a little more staffing in that department. They are really understaffed right now. And then the last project update I wanted to offer is the TEC has been trying to support an ongoing partnership with the Office of Violence Prevention to get them to do more around trans-specific violence. And they are running a program right now called Minneapolis Violence Prevention Community Champions. It's workshops around violence prevention that people can go to get a sort of certification. And they just wanted to extend the offer that if the TEC had any interest in proposing a workshop that would be a part of those full day trainings, if there's any particular content that you wanted them covering, either that some of you wanted to help provide or just that you wanted to be in there and you wanted to throw out and see if they could find someone else to help provide, that they're really interested in TEC feedback on what the Minneapolis Violence Prevention Community Champions should be learning. And that's a you can think of things later and shout them out, but also, is there anything that's coming up right now that folks want to share on that?
This is Amira. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is sort of intimate partner violence, and yeah, I don't actually know of anything besides awareness and like in terms of data collected on that in the city or anything, but that's one thing that comes to mind. Yeah.
This is track clarification question, so I pass that on accurately. Are you talking about wanting there to be content on intimate partner violence specifically in trans communities, or intimate partner violence in general that's just taught in a queer and trans inclusive way?
I think there's what I would want to highlight is sort of these specific experiences that trans people go through in and the intimate partner violence sort of that that is kind of a trans specific experience being part of that curriculum, if that makes sense.
Totally. This is track. I'll pass that on. Thank you for that. This track, if nobody has anything else, we are going to move into co-chair elections, and then into priority setting and subcommittees for 2022. And so the framing I'll offer for co-chairs real quickly is objectively, you all can choose the number of chairs you have. Historically, the TEC has had anywhere from 1 to 3 co-chairs. Generally 2 or 3, only 1 at these kind of in-between moments of somebody having stepped off and us not having brought more people on yet. And And since it is up to you all how many you want to have, I think the smoothest voting process for this logistically probably is going to be everyone who's interested in being a co-chair, sharing their name, if you want to share a couple sentences about why you're interested, and then probably having I think we could approach this one of two ways. I spent a little bit of time trying to figure out logistically how best to do this. I think either somebody could motion for how many co-chairs they wanted to have, depending on how many people are running, and then we could vote on that and vote from there. Or we could have everybody. No, I think we need to figure out how many co-chairs we want to have before there's any logical way to vote. So the people who are running for co-chair are going to share. Then we'll accept motions and vote on motions for how many co-chairs we're having. And then from there, we'll figure out voting on the co-chairs specifically. Sorry, the last time we did this was a in-person. No, maybe it wasn't in person. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to stop talking. People who are interested in running for co-chair, please unmute and share who you are and why you're interested.
I can go first. I'm Diana. I am interested because I enjoy doing this work. This is something I'm really excited to be involved in. And I think it's something that can really, it's fun to have a hand in city government and to feel like I'm actually affecting my city in a good way. I've been in Minneapolis for 5 years now, and I've fallen in love with the place and want to make it better. So I want to be able to do that by having a sort of leadership role here as well.
I'm Olivia St. John, and I spend a lot of my day, my work basically is focused entirely around like storytelling, stakeholder management, and raising funds and finances for projects that I believe in. So I'd love to put those skills to use. Whether it's co-chair or not, I will absolutely be actively involved in every way that I can. But as a 6'3" trans woman, I often don't have a choice about whether or not I'm thrust into political discussions or debates about my existence. Being a part of this is very empowering and affirming because it brings positivity in that. And yeah, I would love to just continue to increase my efforts with the group, and being co-chair I think would be helpful in that.
And this is Kenzie. Your boy's running for re-election. But I will say as an asterisk, and I'm kind of getting emotional just thinking about it, but I believe my last official TEC meeting will be in June. And it is a little premature to kind of announce that, but I feel like it makes a lot of sense for this context. But my dream is to usher in our two other folks running, and then eventually when I fall off mid-year, then we'll still have two co-chairs. So yeah, kind of a sad announcement, but also I still want to be co-chair until I leave, so yeah.
This is track. Is there anyone else who's interested? If not, we need motions from anyone who has an opinion on how many co-chairs to be electing today. I know this is a silly way to do it. I can't find another way.
I would like to motion to have 3 co-chairs, switching to 2 at some indeterminate point in the future, if necessary.
I second that.
Amazing. Okay, amendment to my previous plan. I think actually probably the easiest vote process on this, so I don't do 3 rounds of calling roll, is if you are motioning therefore for it to be these 3 co-chairs, for you to say that, and that if you are not, please say, but if you are, you can say that, and then everybody can just vote on that, and we call roll once.
I motion to vote on whether the 3 people running for co-chair should be co-chairs.
Second.
Great. I'm going to call the roll. Thank you all. Sorry, I'm not an expert on Robert's rules. We're doing our best. Kenzie,
Here, just kidding. Yes.
Diana,
I
May,
Yes.
Billy,
Yes.
Nissa,
Yes.
Olivia,
Yes.
Amira,
Yes.
and Taryn. Taryn, you're
Yes.
on.
Yes.
Great.
Sorry.
You're good. No worries. Amazing. There are 8 in favor, none opposed, 3 absent. And the motion passes. And welcome to our 2 new co-chairs and our returning co-chair. I will follow up with you all after this to schedule co-chair meetings. Get excited. And so now we're going to move in to priority setting and subcommittees for 2022. Apologies, Kenzie. I feel like I took over a lot of facilitation because I just had to lead most of these sections anyway, but that was not what I was supposed to do. But I feel like I'm gonna propose a 1-minute stretch break before we get into this because we've done a bunch of talking. Grab water or something if you need while I get this PowerPoint up to screen share. Alrighty, folks who are off camera, can you just give me a thumbs up, emoji react, so I know that you're back if you are back, or camera on. Either way works. Awesome. Sweet. So I believe how we're going to do this, I'm going to do a little bit of quick past history to ground us in what subcommittees have you had in the past? What do we know is coming up this year? And then Kenzie is going to facilitate you all through thinking about priorities for this year, subcommittees, budget, and who you want to bring in to present to the TEC. All of which, of course, can be ongoing conversations, but kind of setting some amount of framework for the year. So,
Pardon me. This is May. I have a question.
Go for it.
When Kenzie is describing the subcommittees, will there be discussion about when the subcommittees meet? Because that will influence choices.
Yes, thank you. We are just going to figure out what subcommittees to have this year. And then my goal is people can raise their hands who wants to be on what, and I will follow up with you all afterwards to like do a scheduling poll and hopefully find a time that works for you all. And then next month you will officially adopt your subcommittee meeting calendar. So hopefully we're going to make it work based on your schedules. Does that answer your question, May?
Yes, thank you very much.
Totally. Any other questions? If not, I am going to screen share. And Ryder and Tafton, if this messes up having each other pinned, or if you need a minute to just get stuff reset up, let me know so I know we're good. Alrighty. If I could get a update when we're good, that would be awesome.
One second, Tafton's image got really small, Ryder is saying.
I also put this in the chat, but if you click on a person, they should get bigger again.
Okay, 1 second while I try that. Is that pinning?
You can, yeah, you can pin them, or sometimes if you just click on them, that does enough. Like not the 3 dots, just literally click on the video.
Got it.
Great. Everybody, if you have tech difficulties, let me know. If you have comments, please just unmute and share them, or like Ryder jump in signing and share them, obviously, because I cannot see you all well on this screen when I am screen sharing. But so past subcommittees, super high level. The 2 that existed last year were policy and training. I've listed on here the priorities they had as well, most of which are themes you can see in your recommendations. Policy focusing on MPD accountability and alternatives to policing, housing equity, sex work decriminalization, banning the trans panic defense and safe use sites, and training focused on expanding the city's Gender Inclusivity 101 training, which is now up and going again, getting a trans and GNC competency training for ASL interpreters, which we did, and developing a kind of action-oriented 201 training at the city. Other past subcommittees include public awareness and community engagement, which was responsible for a lot of the TECs like tabling at events or holding listening sessions. Summit planning, which has since been incorporated just into the general planning process at the city if TEC members want to be a part of that. A brief but awesome committee that worked on the TEC's bylaws and guidelines. And then before I was at the city, a housing committee. So I can't give you as much detail about what they did. Some key past accomplishments, and highlighting these again just so we don't end up accidentally restarting a project we already did. As I said, the Gender Inclusivity 101 training, getting the staff role that I am in funded full-time and ongoing was a big budget fight and a big accomplishment. Presenting annual recommendations to council since 2018. And out of those, some housing policies have been adopted or amended. There's the restroom policy piece that I just talked about, the property owner training, the gender equity guidelines we were just talking about, adding the panic defense ban to what we're lobbying for the state to change, since we can't change it at the city level, and the HR trans equity review that we were just talking about has been completed. These are not all the things that have ever happened, but some highlights. I'll pause for questions before I go to the next slide.
And we're going to go ahead and switch interpreters now too. We're all set.
Great. Okay, so what do we know about what's coming this year? What is going to be happening in the city that you all can influence? In general, we are moving to a strong mayor structure. I know less than I want to about what that's going to mean. This city council term is only 2 years instead of 4 years because of the impact of redistricting, which means a lot of things. It means it's going to be hard for them to get much done because they're going to spend the first year really getting their feet underneath them. That's a weird metaphor. They're going to spend the first year really figuring out the processes, and then by the next year, it'll already be an election year. So this is going to be, like, next year they will be scrambling to have stuff that they've done for re-election, but it's going to be a weird council cycle. In this spring and early summer, we're going to have the American Rescue Plan Act Phase 2 budget process, where, like I said, I have put in an ask around the restroom incentives. I will hopefully be able to put in an ask for the property owner trainings. In November and December, as always, we're going to have the annual budget process. If tenant opportunity to purchase passes, there will be a big push to get enough funding behind the project for it to be successful. There will also probably be a big push to continue to fund and expand the mental health crisis response teams that are going out instead of MPD. There will be many other parts of the budget, obviously, but those are things in your recommendations that I know will be budget conversations. And then this year is also going to involve a lot of redevelopment and re-envisioning of the Division of Race and Equity, both because we just concluded a 5-year grant that directed most of our work and are figuring out where we go from here, and because I'm the only staff left in the division right now, and as we restaff the office, and particularly as we hire a new director who gets to kind of shape the future direction of the office, there is going to be a lot of growth and shift that probably happens out of that. That is a weird thing to say when I can't see any of your faces. Policy that we know City Council is working on this year: tenant opportunity to purchase, a work group looking at rent control options, the encampment response policy I mentioned. There are a ton of things that will probably happen. Those 3 are things I know are happening. Potential council policy, community safety work, such as the MPD staffing study. I made this PowerPoint more than 2 weeks ago. There is obviously now a lot more in that conversation than there was when I made this PowerPoint. I would add the conversation on no-knock warrants, and a potential Department of Public Safety, and probably a lot else to that bucket now. Municipal ID, safe use sites, many more things, but as some potential things. And what do we know is happening internal to the city? Continuing to roll out the gender inclusivity training for city departments, following up on the results of the trans equity review, supporting Minneapolis Employment and Training in getting those trainings out to their providers, and then policy that is in process right now, that I am working on, that Race Equity is working on, the gender equity guidelines in professional services contracts that work around incentivizing gender-neutral restrooms, and trying to get more anti-discrimination content in the property owner training. I'm going to pause there again for questions. There aren't any. I'm going to say a couple things quickly about budget and past presentations, and then we're going to figure out this year. So what have we so there is $15,000 each year that is allocated to the trans equity work. That does not cover salaries or benefits or anything like that. That is program money. What have we historically spent it on? Interpretation. The city does not have a process for like a centralized money source of funding for interpretation. And so each office, to the degree that they have anything translated or interpreted, covers that, which feels like helpful context in terms of how this process works. Compensation for community engagement if we've held a focus group and paid people. Tabling fees and or supplies for outreach events, and summit expenses. The summit costs far more than $15,000. It is mostly funded by sponsorships, by outside money that we raise ourselves. Any amount of the $15,000 that we have to cover the summit, we put to it, but it would not cover the summit even if we spent it wholly there. We cannot spend this money based on city policy on food or beverages, on gift cards, which is why in order to compensate people for focus groups, they have to invoice the city, on stipends for you all, unfortunately, and on anything over $5,000 unless we go through an official contracting process. And so I offer these just as kind of limitations. Appointed boards do not technically have budgets. This money is not like technically the TEC's money. And I experience you all as one of the forces that directs and shapes the work I do. And that means if there is work you want to do that has expenses behind it, I want to know that. So as I'm budget planning for the year, we can incorporate that. Does anyone have any budget questions? Then the last thing I'm going to go through is like, who have we heard from in the past in terms of monthly presentations? And then I'm going to pass it to Kenzie so you all can kind of take this information and do some brainstorming on where to go from here. And this is mostly moving from most recent to least recent if I did it right. Emphasis on if I did it right. We heard about tenant opportunity to purchase as it was being written. We heard about Representative Ilhan Omar's constituent services. We heard from Minneapolis Employment and Training. We heard from Twin Cities Quorum about expanding the city's definition of supplier diversity. We heard, I don't remember, from the city's Intergovernmental Relations Department about how the city can lobby at the state level. We heard from Minneapolis Public Schools about their work. We heard about the city budget process. We heard about the city's trafficking prevention work. We heard about local two-spirit leadership. We heard from the Office of Violence Prevention. We heard from the 911 work group, which is the source of those mental health crisis response teams, that project. We heard from Human Resources about that trans equity review. We heard from Outfront Minnesota. We heard about the ADA and language access work in neighborhood and community relations. We heard from Civil Rights, from the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, and from a couple projects at the Park Board. And all of these are people that you could choose to bring back to the TEC again if you want, particularly since many of you are new and were not here for many of these presentations. But I just offer that as context. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to put this link to a Jamboard in the chat. If you haven't used a Jamboard before, I'm hoping that Kenzie and I are hoping that it's pretty self-explanatory. And this is going to give some space to think through. Kenzie, I will let you take this over now. I will stop. You're on mute though, Kenzie.
You would think I would know better by now. But yes, I have never used Jamboard before, but in track now I can't see your little key that you made. It sounds like we're doing Post-its for most important issues.
Yes. Hang on, I can screen share this again. Give me 1 second.
I'm just taking some notes.
There we go. It's up.
Okay, yes. So what are our key issues that we want to focus on? How easy/hard are these issues to accomplish? And to do that, we'll do a classic red, yellow, green. And then are these issues in the realm of our influence? And arrow if yes, Trek says. So I think my only preface before we really start jamming is just to be aware, and I believe this is a conversation that we've had before, but because trans people are human beings with several identities and lives, I think everything could be framed as an issue that affects trans people. And so that's going to give us a lot of ideas in terms of like what is important to us. So unfortunately, we're going to need to whittle that down. But yeah, we have the opportunity to shape where our recommendations are going this year. So I would say, I don't know, really advocate for something that you're passionate about. Because then when it comes time to start like actually advocating for these things, TC members, I think, are going to be more open to emailing their like council member or making calls when it comes to voting times. So yeah, with that, I myself am going to open up the Jamboard.
And this is track. I'm going to add one how-to Jamboard piece. So if you open the link in the chat, and thank you to our observers who joined on the phone and are very patiently waiting through this, and I will also we will read things out as we come up with them, but on the left, you're going to have a line of options, and like the middle one is this little Post-it square. If you click on that, it'll give you a Post-it that you can type in and then plop anywhere on the page. I stuck in the corner some red, yellow, and green circles and some arrows. You can drag those around to mark your and other people's Post-its. If we run out of room, at the top of your screen is a one out of one with left and right arrows. If you just click the right arrow, it'll give us another board and you can keep throwing things on there. And so this is just a little quiet time, closest we can get to the like big Post-it paper on the wall situation, for you to throw some ideas up there. And if you're having technical issues, also, please feel free to unmute and say things, and I'll put them on a Post-it for you, or put things in the chat. I'm happy to translate stuff over if needed.
Beautiful. So, I mean, let's give it 5 minutes or so. Come back. And I'm going to work on my Post-its.
This is Billy. I just have a question. Are we putting on the sticky notes our thoughts on what the subcommittee should be also? Like I don't think we've had the discussion yet. Like, I think that's what we're trying to do right now, right? Like, do we want more than 2 subcommittees? Do we want 3? Should we put that on sticky notes, like what we think a subcommittee should be to address the issues that we're getting? Or do we want to have that discussion beforehand? I don't know.
Great question. I feel like we were going to go like out of priorities, let's create our subcommittees. And if you want to like make a second board, hit one over and have ideas about subcommittees that you want to stick on there already, go for it. Oh, and this is track. I just want to offer a reminder that priorities can be both like policy priorities you want to pass or like priorities you want, things you want to spend time on as the TEC, whether that's like a form of community engagement or something else like that. Like, I actually see someone putting getting the word out about the TEC right now, but realize that that maybe came out sounding only like policy. So.
I'm ready. If anyone needs more time, I can be patient. Great. Well, track, we good to go? Okay. So I'm just gonna read off. Okay, that was me. Green circle. I'm just gonna read off all of our sticky notes. Let's see. So, okay, to be transparent, I wrote getting the word out about TEC. And since we already opened up the conversation about subcommittees, I would like to see PACE or a community engagement subcommittee pop up. And so I don't know. That's why I put that sticky note. Somebody wrote city contract requirements. Decriminalizing sex work, policing generally, and then a little more detail on that, replacing NPD with mental health workers, perma-banning no-knock warrants. Someone else wrote the public safety department. We have safe use sites, rent control and housing equity, continued LGBTQ inclusive education and reading materials in schools. Maybe taking a proactive stance on that, given actions taken around the US recently. We're seeing book banning, and civil rights ordinance updates. So, pause to see if anyone wants to elaborate on their sticky note.
I can go. This is Nissa.
Yeah.
So I added in city contract requirements. While I know that the work is continuing to like progress around this, I feel like this is one of the easiest levers that we have as a city to encourage certain behaviors that we would like to see in, you know, organizations that we work with. And so continuing to focus on ways that we can push anyone the city contracts with about anything, essentially, to meet certain basic requirements regarding trans and gender nonconforming folks, I think would be definitely within our purview and definitely accomplishable with the right poking at the right people.
I'd like to speak to two of them. One is the PACE, the getting the word out. I think that it's super important because we need to make sure that people understand that they have advocates and that they can, you know, reach out to us with their issues. It's also very useful for building empathy. We all have our own experiences that are very intimate to us, but it doesn't mean that we understand everything that people are experiencing as well around us in the cities. And so it gives us a lot of opportunities to be out in front of people that we're serving in this role. And so it's very important to me on that. And then the other one I put out there, the one I put out there was the continued LGBTQ inclusive education. As somebody who grew up in the Bible Belt in the South, where we did not allow any discussion about things that were LGBTQ related, it's all too real to me when I see the stuff that's going on. It's been hard to read. So I'm while Minneapolis might be very progressive compared to a lot of the places that have done that, I wouldn't put it past there being advocates on the other side already pushing for similar things. So I think that we need to take a proactive approach.
I'm just gonna say a thing real quick on the education side of things. Nissa again. One of the things that we kind of talked about when we had someone from Minneapolis Public Schools visit with us is how can we be working with Minneapolis Public Schools more, because we don't actually have any authority over what they do. And so trying to find an in with that seems like worth exploring, or at least who we could partner with, or ways that I'm not sure it's a function of a city advisory board though, but more just like making sure that we have a connection, because I'm not sure what we can even do regarding Minneapolis Public Schools, because they're their own thing. So I just wanted to throw that out there as something that I wish we had more answers on and more ability to do stuff with. I'm just not sure what it looks like for us to be involved in that.
Yeah, this is Diana. I think something like that could easily fall under community engagement. And so I'm doing that sort of thing with the public schools, developing a relationship between the schools and the city and stuff, and our council to advocate for those things. Yeah.
I will happen to say too that everything else feels like it falls under policy subcommittee. At least as somebody who was in the policy subcommittee for 2021, you know, just tackling all of those policy things. So continued conversations about MPD and the, you know, decriminalizing sex work, safe use sites. So I am a strong advocate to keep the policy subcommittee around. And then while I'm on the mic, I also would really like to see a community engagement or a PACE subcommittee. And I think my only question is, historically we've had a training subcommittee, and it doesn't seem to be like our asks skew towards the training realm. So I guess I would ask if anybody sees value or of course there's value, but given what our priorities are, is that something you're excited about? You know, would you be on the training subcommittee?
This is Billy. Being that I was on the policy subcommittee last year, I can't speak to what the training subcommittee did, but I feel like based off of what we've got going right now, it would make sense to at least do the policy, keep the policy subcommittee, and then do the PACE subcommittee. I would also volunteer that I think it might be helpful to have a budget, or like maybe a budget and outreach subcommittee, in terms of, and maybe this could be like in conjunction with policy. I just think that policy does so much. Like, I don't want to put too much on the policy subcommittee. I think having a budget subcommittee, especially for people who have like fundraising experience, that maybe can help out. I know with the summit's quite a bit of money, but also the outreach portion would be to help. Sorry, my dog's gonna bark in a second. to help. The outreach portion of the budget and outreach committee would be like to help with Summit, to help get us presenters for like TEC meetings and like just things that kind of fall to the wayside that might be too much of an ask to put on a policy subcommittee or the PACE subcommittee. And since we have 3 co-chairs, like maybe it would also be helpful to have a co-chair oversee each subcommittee. But that's just my thought.
This is Diana. I would second that. I think policy would be good for the overarching policy goals that we want, and then the budget committee would be the nitty-gritty of what we actually like are able to put into the city budget and suggestions to make and stuff. So I think it's good to separate those 2 out.
This is Nissa. I don't have a comment on the budget side of things, but I did want to speak to Kinsey's comments around whether or not we have training and whether people are interested in that. I also think that that is the sort of thing that could be taken on if we did find that there is a need, like partway through, by either the PACE subcommittee, was where I'd probably place it, or if everything like hit the wall or whatever, it could go into policy because there's some related policy things, and we could address that if it needs to be its own thing at that time. But since it's not really a priority, I think we can just kind of be like, we'll look at it if we need to later. And we know we'll be able to pick it up if that happens.
This is Track. I just want to offer one thought on the budget piece as context, not as in this is my decision. One being that other than American Rescue Plan Act, so this year's unusual, normally the city budget process kind of happens for 1 month a year. This year it'll happen in 2 chunks. So in terms of advocating around city budget, you all can make a subcommittee around that, or like pull together a couple people to just like work on that for a month or 2 if you need to, if you don't want it to be a year-long thing. I know in 2021, folks chose to only have 2 subcommittees instead of 3, so that there would be like more than 2 or 3 people on each subcommittee, and you would feel like you had a like critical mass to get stuff done depending on people's capacity. We have a couple open seats on the TEC right now that I'm working on filling, but we are a little low on numbers right now. So I am not saying that's what you need to do, but want to kind of offer that that's where those decisions were made from in the past, in case that's helpful in thinking through how widely to split work as well.
So my question is, let's say we vote to have 2 subcommittees right now. Is there anything stopping us from forming another subcommittee later on, should we find that we need it?
This is Track. You can totally do that if you need to.
Beautiful. So what I'm hearing is strong support for policy, strong support for a community engagement or a PACE, and maybe starting there and branching off accordingly. Should policy get, a lot of stuff thrown at them, but we're pretty low on numbers. So Track, I understand the wanting to have more than one person in each subcommittee.
Given all that, this is Nissa. I motion to do what Track told us to do. No, I'm just and vote on whether we would like there to be 2 subcommittees going into this year, PACE/community engagement subcommittee and policy.
Second that.
Awesome. This is Track. I'm going to call roll. Kenzie.
Yeah.
Diana.
Yes.
May.
Yes.
Billy.
Yes.
Nissa.
You betcha.
Olivia.
Yes.
Amira,
Yes.
and Taryn.
Yes.
Awesome. There are 8 in favor, 3 absent, none opposed. The motion passes. For simplicity, I'm just going to send the whole TEC, including the wonderful folks on here who are not official members but still welcome to join subcommittees. I'm going to send everybody the scheduling polls for both, and you can just fill out which you want instead of everybody trying to frantically decide right now what you want to join. And I am going to take responsibility for the fact that I made us run late. So Kenzie, up to you if there's things that get pushed to the next meeting.
Yes, well, I was going to say, is there a way that when you send out the scheduling poll, if we could also maybe do like a Google form of, is there anyone you want to ask back in terms of presentations, or is there anything in particular you want to allot for the budget? We could do that. Otherwise, we could just wait for the next time. But I really like our presentations, and I'd like to get that ball rolling, so to speak.
Yeah, this is track. I will send out a Google form and then we can talk through the results next time, but the co-chairs and I can go through that in advance and see if it's possible to get something going even for March, and if not, definitely once you all talk it through for April. But around both budget and presentation stuff, that is a great idea. Thank you.
And with that, motion to adjourn? Unless Track had anything else to say?
Motion seconded. Does that have to be seconded? I don't know.
It does, but we don't have to vote, so we're all good now.
Second. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.